Hey there, everybody. It's Jonathan. Can you hear me okay? We got to make sure we're getting this live. Where's my audio? Audio's good. Camera's good. All right. Hey, everybody. Jonathan Edwards here. It is, I'm a little off the cuff today. So going live, trying out some new technology. Thought I'd pick a pretty interesting topic today to talk about. So this might be a surprise to some of you. For some of you wondering like, oh, why'd you miss me? That sort of thing. It's okay. It's okay. So, the plan is that I'm going to be doing a lot more of these videos, and I'm going to try to get in probably kind of every day about noon Eastern time, so that if you got an athlete who is in school, and a lot of my people are on the East Coast, so I figured if we can hit East Coast at noon, Pacific Coast, West Coast at 9 a.m. We'll probably be pretty good here. So, for those of you guys in the middle, I apologize, but we're gonna do our best. So today, I wanted to talk about, uh, a lot of my athletes are struggling, right? And the Aspen Institute, which I'm not sure if you know what that is, but the Aspen Institute is this like ridiculously smart think tank that talks about a lot of stuff. And they came out with a report this week on the kind of the effects of the coronavirus and what's really happening now for athletes, and not that this applies to our most dedicated athletes, but in general, 30% of like kids polled right now are like quitting sports, right? So this trickles up, and a lot of my athletes are struggling with this too, because for my winter athletes, some of them have had their season like completely put off. Just to give an example, like luge athletes in the United States and Canada, they have decided not to travel to Europe, and so they're staying home. So now all those athletes are kind of going like, "What the hell is this?" I've got collegiate athletes whose seasons are getting bumped and postponed, and now for like I got high school athletes where their fall season has gotten bumped, and now they're going to potentially play in the spring, and that's going to conflict with their other sport that they like to play. And this is all just this massive mess in a lot of ways. What I wanted to talk about today was how to stay motivated, and whether so if your athlete is struggling with this, and you're a parent or coach listening to me right now, then we're going to try to set up an environment where they can where they can figure it out, like, and stick with it. And then if you're the athlete listening to me, like, then you're going to come up with some tools today, a little bit of an understanding as to why you may be feeling the way you're feeling. Two things about motivation is that typically um, motivation goes in like kind of, there's two sides of motivation. There's intrinsic, which means like motivation that comes from within, and then there's extrinsic, which is motivation that comes from outside. So um, one of my athletes who's an athlete in a sport, a traditional sport, is actually an athlete now, has been spending so much time playing like online. They are now looking to compete in esports, which is kind of cool. So esports is a field that really I find really fascinating, and it's a field that I really enjoy talking to those athletes, because you don't think of them as athletes per se, but in the fact of taking on a game, then um, to me, you're either an athlete on a field, you're an athlete in front of a computer, you're an athlete in life, right? So it's all the same to me. So there's intrinsic motivation, which is motivation that comes from within, but then there's also extrinsic motivation, which is motivation that comes from outside, right? So to give like a very vague, you've got to have basically an understanding that if you can balance the two. So athletes right now who are losing their intrinsic motivation are they're that inner drive to stick with it, what they're doing, right? The best thing an athlete can do is put themselves in an environment where they're getting some extrinsic motivation. And that could be severe, like it could be like a parent going, cracking the whip, going, no, get out there and train. Or it can just be getting around your team as much as you possibly can. And then you can also um, uh, you can keep an athlete in an environment where they are almost forced to stay in a routine. Okay. So for a lot of my athletes, they're falling out of routine, right? So maybe they've been, competing with a program, and now that program is dealing with issues where they're not having normal practices, or they have to train at home, or somebody has tested positive, and then now everything's kind of, just kind of, it gets kind of obliterated. So the thing that we need to understand here is that we we have to stay mindful of those outside like events that are affecting our athletes like internal motivation, right? So because if you just turn a blind eye to that and say like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, we all have to deal with it, I think that's unfair, right? So because every athlete deals with it differently, and two things that happen are, an athlete can, they can, if an athlete is introverted, right? And we can kind of break this down on two sides. If an athlete is introverted, then they're probably okay with not having to go to practice, or not having to deal with their team, or not having, they might feel relieved by that in some ways. But for an athlete who is more extroverted and really thrives on kind of that team environment, or thrives on a crowd, this is really going to affect them. So we have to be mindful of kind of the outside forces that affect an athlete's motivation. Okay, it's really, really, really important. And again, if we dismiss it, like, because I was dealing with one of my athletes this week, and their parents were like, "Oh, just suck it up," everybody's dealing with the same thing, and I had to go in like, "Well, wait a second, you're not being mindful of what's really affecting your particular athlete, right?" So you got to be kind of, you got to be thinking like that. Um, Now, for intrinsic motivation, for my athletes who still have a level of like intrinsic motivation, they are looking at coronavirus and all this as a distinct opportunity, because they are expecting their competitors to quit at the worst, to be affected minimally, and they're really looking at it as an opening um, to kind of maybe take a step ahead. I've got athletes who, this is a time of year where they start to travel, and some of those athletes are actually really enjoying the fact that they don't have to travel, right? They're looking at a time that, that maybe they're stressed out by that travel, and coronavirus makes that even worse, but, or it makes a stressful, like traveling stressful alone, but now not having the stress of travel is gone to begin with, and so now they're like, oh, this is great. I can relax. I can rest. I can recover. Um, you know, I've got a handful of athletes that have been forced over to Europe to train, and now they're stuck there. Like, they've got 2 weeks of quarantining, or they're stuck in a town that there's nothing to do. And so even though they were like intrinsically excited to get over there, now they're in this external environment that is really kind of weighing on them. They can't get out and do so they can't get out and do stuff, right? They can't um they can't eat the foods that they normally would eat if they were at home. And so this has all kind of added these pressures. So intrinsically motivated athletes, right, who are like excited to put in the work and do it, they're getting affected. And so what we can do with those athletes is to find, as much as we can with each individual athlete, find out like, what is it that they are really excited about, right? Despite everything that's going on with coronavirus, what are all the benefits that this could actually be causing them? Finding ways to tap into their whatever like is left of the intrinsic motivation that they have, finding whatever's left, and then tapping into that and reminding them of that, right? And this is where journaling comes in really, really helpful as an athlete, like, twice a day, just reminding themselves of what's good, like what's good right now. Because even in a team environment, there may be other athletes who are just like bitching and moaning and complaining, and an athlete who still has a sense of intrinsic motivation gets weighed down because of this overall environment of that everybody else is kind of like bummed out about, right? And so almost want to silo athletes and go like, all right, listen, how are you doing in this environment? How are you doing, right? And so your athlete, we need to make sure that we're always focusing on their most positive approach to a negative situation, right? A negative situation. The problem for some of my athletes is that the future has become very vague. What was clear and defined and I'm going to jump ahead here. A lot of athletes who struggle with life after sport, what they miss is they miss the routine. They miss actually the extrinsic motivators, those the environment that kind of kept them doing what it is they need to do. Like, people telling them, like, hey, like, when to wake up, when's breakfast, when's lunch, when's dinner, like, wear this, don't wear that, right? Those are all extrinsic motivators in a way. They're kind of almost like they're almost putting up on a bowling alley when they put up those boards in the side so your ball doesn't fall in the gutter. That's what we do with a lot of athletes sometimes, right? Is we're putting up those barriers so they don't fall in the gutter. Well, so now those you know it's like, okay, what are we doing? What like why what does this all mean, right? And so the concept there is this idea of, like, well, where values and performance meet, and coronavirus has really brought out a lot of value discussions for my athletes and their families. It's kind of like, well, is this still worth it, right? Is the pursuit of our sport still worth the time, effort, energy, all the resources, time, effort, time, energy, money? Is it worth it, or should we shift gears? Right. And that is individual to each and every athlete and each and every family. So it's not something I can give a blanket, statement towards, but it's just something to understand that, this is a perfect time to reevaluate those values. Like, I met an athlete just this last week. It was a former skier, high level skier. He had been injured prior to COVID. He was coming back. And then now the coronavirus hit, and it really kind of just blew everything up a little bit. And so he was kind of like, he's 21 years old. He's kind of like, hey, you know what, for me, it just didn't, I was ready to go on to other things. And that's fine. Right. That's totally fine. And he's embraced that challenge and then transition. And only time will tell if he regrets that decision. But he may take this time to just kind of, he's working, he's healing up, and maybe in another year he realizes, like, wow, I'm really relaxed and ready to go, and I'm strong, and that's really cool. Another one of my athletes was on track to play lacrosse in college, and now it's just so uncertain. And the feedback coming out of a lot of schools is that, sports is like, they're just trying to keep kids on campus and trying to keep sports going because it now feels like a major profit center. That's kind of weird. And they've decided to just kind of go, you know what, forget it. I'm done. And that's okay too. But we won't know until down the road if there's regret there. But right now, to keep an athlete somewhat focused, right? And it's important to understand kind of these intrinsic motivators that they have, and stay positive, right? Some of my parents of athletes get super negative, and their athlete actually gets dragged down by that. So my recommendation for parents is to stay positive and learn how to stay positive and keep staying positive, right? Because if your athlete is going to get dragged by anyone, it's mom or dad, right? Or the person in their house who's acting like mom or dad, right? In terms of like guidance and things like that. But the other side of it, those extrinsic motivators, is like, well, what can we do to kind of put those boards up like we're bowling? Like, what do we do to keep this athlete like centered and focused and in an environment that is again positive and moving them forward? What I want to leave with you today, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but because I want you to understand that I think it's unfair to think that, our athletes can keep the same level of motivation right now during coronavirus as they had when everything was just all set in stone, right? And it was very easy, and it was very easy to know what the schedule is going to be, and know when, like, the World Cups are going to start, or school is going to start, or the Olympics. For my Olympic athletes that who had their Olympics, like the Olympics, that thing that happens every 4 years, has now been pushed off. To think that that's not going to affect an athlete, I think, is really naive, right? But the idea here is to help an athlete come to acceptance with how they're feeling and what they're feeling, and then what to do in the situation that they're in. Okay. One of my recommendations I will leave you with right now is is to help your athletes stay off of social media if they can. I know it's really hard to stay, right? It's like telling someone to change the color of their skin. Like you can't do it, right? But it's like, all right, what happens when we look at social media, when we look at Instagram and we look at TikTok and all this stuff, is that we may see an athlete who's training and they post a video and they're training, and your athlete may be home, and if they're not training to that degree or having that experience, like let's say they're a skier and they're in Switzerland right now skiing on a glacier in tremendous amounts of snow, right? And you're stuck in North America and you can't do that. Well, what do you think is going to happen to your athlete? They're going to feel bummed out. They're going to have fear of missing out syndrome. They're going to have all this stuff, and they're going to be really bummed out. And so we don't want that. Okay, we don't want that. So if you can minimize that exposure, like controlling those external motivators, or in this case a demotivator, then it's recommended. So if you feel like your athlete is down or bummed out or whatever, just saying, hey, listen, man, just stay off of social, right? It's not helping you. It's not serving you in this situation, in this environment. Okay. But um, if you are the other side of that, right? If you're the other side of that and you're that athlete and you're in that environment, post all you want, man. It's a little bit of psychological warfare on your competitors, right? But you can, in fact, you can use that to your advantage, but you may also have to um, figure out how it's affecting you. And for my younger athletes, they don't, it's like sleep. You tell an athlete, hey, you should get more sleep, and they're like, yeah, whatever, I don't need that much, I feel fine. The thing is, you don't know how bad you feel, right? Our athletes don't necessarily know how bad they feel. And so just getting off and giving a little bit of a social media detox can be really helpful, right? But that's just one thing of many. So if leaving you with a couple tips, if your athlete can stimulate their senses, right? Meaning putting their head into the situation of competing and training, even if they can't, can really help how they feel inside, right? So whether they go work out or they visualize working out, that can create like basically a biochemical response inside where the brain treats it like they're actually doing it. That can be really helpful. Okay. Um, this can be a time for an athlete, if they are not necessarily competing. This is a time for them to actually increase their knowledge about what it is they're doing. Pick up a book, like pick up get on YouTube, whatever. Get some input, and like pick apart part of your skill as an athlete, and really dive in where you may not have had the time to dive in before. Maybe it can be revolved around physical ability, technical ability, or tactical ability. I had an athlete, this was last year, who had been given a book of an athlete in their sport. It was a very old book. I mean, this would been the equivalent of like this athlete's grandfather competing, right? And so never saw the guy compete, never saw him, but never saw him, never met him. But the idea was that he just dove into this biography of this athlete from, I think it was like 70 years ago. And the athlete was so enamored by the story that it just rekindled in them this excitement, right? And because if I remember correctly, the athlete talked about hurdles he had with his home life, and getting rejected from going to the school he wanted to go to, and then finally coming full circle and having these incredible performances athletically that really hit home to this athlete, and it just kind of lit a fire. It kept him there. um, one of the topics that my athletes are having a lot of trouble with is the idea of autonomy, which is like having some sort of input into what it is they're doing. The training plan has gotten, usually with a training plan had just been given to them, and in the environment, in a normal training environment, that's not a big deal. But now that everybody's kind of stuck at home, and sometimes people don't have gyms that they can go to, um, or maybe they have a gym they can go to, but it's not their normal gym. It's not like being at the Olympic Training Center. This can cause a lot of confusion and cause an athlete to feel quite upset and angry. Don't let that be you, right? Like, if there's a way that the athlete can have some autonomy and some independence in what it is they're doing, that can be really helpful, right? That can just go, it can help an athlete take charge of it. And even part of that autonomy can be saying no to something, right? Saying, no, I'm not going to do that session. Like, it's just a waste of time. It's just not helping me here. So whatever that is, saying no can also be very helpful. It can be empowering to an athlete when they feel like they don't have control. All right. Saying no is a life skill. And it can be really, really, really helpful. The other technique for an athlete to get through coronavirus is to feel some sort of relation to other athletes who are also struggling. Okay. So this is where when mom and dad say, yeah, you know what, you're not the only one going through this, honey. I get it. That can fall on deaf ears, but it can also help an athlete if they do embrace that and they go, all right, yeah, I got it. Maybe it's a group chat or Zoom call and it's athletes in disparate places going like, yeah, we're all dealing with this, but so what can we do today to make this great? Right. And maybe your athlete is the one to take charge in that. I've seen introverted athletes in team environments where all of a sudden they're the ones that spoke up, in the situation, and now they grew as a person because they found this voice that they didn't know they had, right? And now they're really, and then they found this empowered um, attitude, right, to now charge forward and carry on. This is so if your athlete is only extrinsically motivated, coronavirus can basically reveal that pretty quickly. If they're involved in a sport and they're only doing it because of mom and dad, they're trying to make mom and dad proud for whatever reason, coronavirus can pull the rug out from that pretty quickly. Okay, and that's fine. It's fine for the athlete. Sometimes for mom and dad it can be a little tough, but it's this can be. This can be a tough one to deal with. So I'm not going to go in too deep on that one. But keep in mind, coronavirus is affecting everybody in some way. Even our athletes, if you look at the NFL and the NBA and all the professional sports that have had to deal with coronavirus, one thing that I think has been fantastic about coronavirus is this idea that even at the pro level, right, they're playing football games on Tuesdays this year when that normally never happened. And it really embraced an attitude that I try to give to all my athletes is being ready for anything, right? You've just got to be ready for anything. Now that, for the sports scientists out there who, talk about peaking and peaks and valleys and peaking for events. And then now if that event gets moved, well, I think that's telling us a little bit about, with sports science, we can be very rigid and just taking on an attitude of being ready for anything, whether we're competing this week or next week, or it's Monday or Tuesday or whatever, just being ready and giving yourself permission to compete at your best, no matter what the situation, is really important. I'm reminded there was a guy named Pavel Tsatsouline who really brought the kettlebell to the United States. This is about 20 years ago now. The kettlebell, just that big steel ball thing that people throw around, been in Russia and communist Europe for like eons, right? And he brought it over. And I remember reading, he trained like Soviet special forces. And the idea was kind of like, well, hey, if we're getting attacked, it's not like all of our army has the time to do some sort of dynamic warm up and get out there and go. They had to be prepared to go. And that is more of a mental thing than it is just physical. And I think that's really important to understand. And coronavirus, if it's done anything, it's going to help our athletes realize, like, listen, hey, you're not always going to have all that time to be very deliberate about things. And I think naturally that's what we're capable of doing anyway. We're capable, ready to, like, our body is ready to run and go and flee and fight and do all that stuff. It's inside us. And sometimes as athletes, we can get really stuck in an envelope where we need to, if we don't have our perfect warm up today, we're not going to compete at our best. Or if we don't, whatever, like we're shedding that. and then we're going out to compete to the best that we can and being prepared as best as we can in the environment that we're given. All right. So keep that in mind as you move forward. So, all right. So listen, as always, wherever you're watching this, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, I'm going to be everywhere now. Look out. You're going to be sick of this face, but I'm hoping this is helping. And if it helps you, do me a favor, hit the like button, please subscribe, hit that little notification button, the bell icon. If you click that, that really helps, kind of the algorithms and whatnot to help me get this message out there. And by all means, if you know an athlete or parent or coach who needs to hear this message, do me a favor and share it with them. I'd be honored if you did. All right. So thanks a lot, everybody. Take care. You might see me tomorrow if I get this going, but other than that, be sure to subscribe and also head on over to iTunes, where this audio will be up at the Creating High Performance Athletes podcast. All right, guys, take care. Talk to you soon.